Before moving on to the story, don't forget to subscribe and like. Have a nice listening time. It was last summer when my friends and I stumbled upon a place I wish we had never found, the old asylum just outside of town. It was notorious in our small community, and everyone had heard the rumors, but no one dared to actually visit it. Yet, that one night, curiosity got the better of us. My friends, Sarah, Josh, and I, were always drawn to abandoned places. We loved the thrill of exploring, the adrenaline of walking through ruins that once were filled with life. But nothing had ever come close to what we experienced that night. We were hanging out at Sarah's place when Josh brought up the idea. "Hey, you know that old asylum on the outskirts? You guys ever been there?" Josh asked, his eyes gleaming with excitement. I scoffed. "No way, man. Everyone says that place is cursed." Sarah, who was always the more adventurous one, leaned forward with a grin. "Come on, Alex. It's just a bunch of old stories. We should go. I bet it's nothing but some broken walls and rusty beds." The idea seemed stupid at first, but as the night went on, Sarah's enthusiasm rubbed off on me. I didn't want to seem like the coward of the group, so I agreed. We grabbed some flashlights, put on our jackets, and hopped into Josh's car. The drive out to the asylum was long, and the farther we went, the darker the road became. Eventually, we were driving down a narrow, deserted road with nothing but trees surrounding us. "I don't know about this, guys," I muttered as the trees seemed to swallow the car. Josh glanced at me through the rearview mirror. Too late to back out now. The asylum finally appeared through the fog, its silhouette looming in the distance like a skeletal hand reaching out of the ground. It was massive, larger than I had imagined. The building was crumbling, with windows that looked like hollow eyes staring down at us. The air around the place felt heavy, suffocating. "Are we really doing this?" Sarah asked, a slight tremor in her voice that hadn't been there before. Josh turned off the car engine. "We're already here." We grabbed our flashlights and stood in front of the rusted iron gates. The chains that once locked them were broken, hanging loosely. I shivered, but not because of the cold. Something about this place felt wrong, but none of us wanted to admit we were scared. As we stepped through the gates, the wind howled, almost like a warning. "I've got a bad feeling," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Josh shrugged. "It's just an old building." We walked inside the asylum, and the darkness swallowed us whole. Our flashlights barely penetrated the thick gloom. The air was thick with dust, and every step echoed through the empty hallways. The place smelled of mold, decay, and something else. Something I couldn't quite place, but that made my skin crawl. "This place gives me the creeps," Sarah whispered. We ventured deeper into the building, passing empty rooms with broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and graffiti scrawled on the walls. The farther we went, the colder it became. I started to notice that the temperature was dropping unnaturally fast. "Why is it so cold?" I asked, rubbing my arms. "No idea," Josh replied, but he didn't sound so sure anymore. We reached the main hallway, where the patients were once kept. The doors to the old cells were still intact, some of them slightly ajar, creaking as they swayed in the wind. There was a palpable sense of misery lingering in the air. I could almost feel the pain of the people who had been confined here. Suddenly, we heard it, a faint sound, like someone breathing. We all froze. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "Yeah," I whispered back, my heart pounding. We stood still, listening. The breathing grew louder, and it was coming from one of the rooms down the hall. My stomach twisted into knots. "Let's just go," I said, turning to leave, but Josh grabbed my arm. "We came this far. Don't freak out now." Reluctantly, I followed them as we approached the door. It was slightly open, and the breathing was unmistakable now. It was deep, raspy, and unnatural. My heart was racing, and every fiber of my being screamed to turn back. Josh pushed the door open, and our flashlights revealed an old hospital bed. But what caught our attention was the figure standing at the corner of the room, its back to us. Who's there?" Sarah stammered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It just stood there, facing the wall. I wanted to run, but my legs were frozen in place. "Maybe it's just some homeless guy," Josh said, though even he sounded scared now. I shook my head. No way. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching this figure. And then, without warning, it turned around. My blood ran cold. Its face, it wasn't human. The eyes were hollow pits, and its mouth hung open in a silent scream. Its skin was pale and cracked, as though it had been rotting for years. The smell of decay hit us all at once, and I gagged. "Run!" I yelled, and we bolted. I don't know how we made it out, but we did. We ran through the dark hallways, hearing the thing's footsteps behind us, echoing in the shadows. I swear it was getting closer, but I didn't dare look back. We burst through the front doors and didn't stop running until we were back at Josh's car. We all piled in, gasping for breath. Josh fumbled with the keys, and as he started the engine, I glanced back at the asylum. In the window, I saw it, the figure standing there watching us. We sped off, none of us saying a word. The silence in the car was suffocating. We never talked about it again. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that breathing, and I wonder if it ever really stopped following us. For weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. It wasn't just the memory of that place, or the horrific image of the figure in the window. It was something more. At first, I thought it was just paranoia, but soon, the strange occurrences began. It started small. One night, I was lying in bed, my room dark except for the faint glow from my phone on the nightstand. I was scrolling through social media, trying to distract myself from the lingering unease that had settled deep in my chest ever since we left the asylum. My mind would often drift back to that night, replaying every detail. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure, the way it turned towards us, the hollow eyes that seemed to look through us, not at us. Suddenly, I heard a soft creak coming from the hallway. I froze. My parents were asleep, and the house should have been completely silent. But there it was again, the creak of floorboards, slow and deliberate, as if someone, or something, was walking down the hall toward my room. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps grew louder, closer. My heart pounded in my chest, each thud echoing in my ears. Then the sound stopped, right outside my door. I stared at the door, waiting, terrified to move. "Alex," a voice whispered, soft but unmistakable. I shot up in bed, my skin crawling. It was Sarah's voice, but it wasn't possible. Sarah wasn't here. She hadn't even spoken to me much since the asylum incident. None of us had talked about it. "Sarah," I whispered, barely daring to speak. The door didn't open. There was no response, just silence. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I called Sarah. "Hey, have you noticed anything strange lately?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. On the other end of the line, there was a long pause. Then she sighed. "Yeah, I've been hearing things too." I didn't want to say anything because I thought I was losing it. "What kind of things?" I asked, feeling a cold knot forming in my stomach. Sarah hesitated. "I keep hearing footsteps in my apartment at night. And, Alex, I swear I saw something in the mirror the other day. It wasn't me. It looked like that thing from the asylum." My heart raced. "You saw it? Just for a second?" but I can't get it out of my head. And Josh hasn't been answering my calls. Have you talked to him? No, I admitted. I haven't heard from him either. Maybe we should go check on him. We agreed to meet later that afternoon. I was on edge the whole day, jumping at every little sound. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that the asylum had just freaked me out more than I wanted to admit. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. When Sarah and I arrived at Josh's apartment, we knocked several times, but there was no answer. "Josh!" I yelled, banging on the door. "Open up, man!" After what felt like an eternity, we heard movement from inside. The door creaked open just a crack, and Josh's face appeared, pale and haggard. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Josh, what's going on?" Sarah asked, concern in her voice. He opened the door wider, and we stepped inside. The apartment was dark, the curtains drawn tight, and a thick, musty smell hung in the air. Empty food containers were scattered across the floor, and it looked like he hadn't left the couch in days. "I've been hearing things," Josh said, his voice hoarse. "At night, I hear it walking around my apartment, and I see it sometimes just standing there watching me. I can't get rid of it." Sarah and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Josh," I said softly, "it's been happening to us too. Whatever we saw at the asylum, I think it followed us." Josh shook his head, eyes wide with fear. "It's not just following us. It's here, Alex. It's in this room. I can feel it." Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. I could see my breath hanging in the air, and a heavy, oppressive presence filled the space around us. The lights flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. Then we heard it, the same raspy breathing from the asylum. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. We turned toward the corner of the room, and there it was. The figure, standing in the shadows, its hollow eyes fixated on us. The same decayed face, the same silent scream. It hadn't just followed us. It had attached itself to us, feeding off our fear. "Get out!" Josh screamed, stumbling backward. "Get out of my house!" But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting. And then it took a step forward. "Josh, we need to leave now," I shouted, grabbing Sarah by the arm. But as we turned to run, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. The figure was getting closer, the air growing colder with each passing second. The walls seemed to close in around us, and my chest tightened as panic set in. "We need to find a way out," Sarah cried, pulling at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The figure was right behind Josh now, its decayed hand reaching out for him. "Help me!" Josh screamed, his voice cracking with terror. Without thinking, I grabbed a chair and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered, and cold night air rushed in. "Go!" I yelled, pushing Sarah through the broken window. We scrambled outside, our hands and legs bleeding from the broken glass. Josh was the last to make it out, but as he climbed through, something grabbed his leg. "No!" he screamed, thrashing wildly. Sarah and I pulled him free, and we all ran as fast as we could down the street, not stopping until we were far from the apartment. When we finally stopped, gasping for air, we looked back. The apartment building stood there, silent and still. But in the shattered window, I saw it, the figure, watching us from the darkness. We haven't spoken about that night since. We never returned to Josh's apartment, and we never went back to the asylum. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear that breathing, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for the next time it can find us. And this time, it won't let go.